tough, such a long gap between meetings, but we're all back together, so welcome everyone. So if I get adoption of the agenda, all those in favor, opposed, carried, and approval of the minutes. All those in favor, opposed, carried. So we have three delegates today, and our first speaker is Nathan Davidovich.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, we have to move the 3 minutes rule finished today, and now it's 5 minutes.
So it's actually still three minutes, but you are right. The pilot ends at the end of this meeting. At next meeting, a report will come back to the Mayor's Council.
Well, you can change it for this meeting. There's only 3 of us, so we could give that.
Anyway, well, welcome, Nathan.
It's I mean, I assumed that it was supposed to be whatever. It just I don't know if all of you got the 2 pages that I sent in.
Yes, they do have them.
Oh, they do. So I spoke to the Minister Robinson, and she would like you to approve my 5-year, $10 billion and it's better than your plan. Your plan is from 2012, and but anyhow, I mean, the Fairness Commissioner was just announced for ICBC. As you know, we had a Transit Commissioner till 2014, and I'm telling you, the government is going to announce a Fairness Commissioner for Transit too, for the whole province, both Translink and BC Transit. If they have it for ICBC, why shouldn't we have it for Transit? But we'll see what happens. Yesterday they announced again that Vancouver is the worst city in Canada for traffic, even behind Toronto and Montreal. So we have to do something. I know, many of the mayors are pushing, Mayor Stewart, Kennedy Stewart, yesterday pushing to get cooperation from everybody to help with the UBC SkyTrain extension, which of course is a good thing. You're planning to go to Ottawa next month, but you really should go first to Victoria. Unless you get Victoria to approve things, there's no sense of going really to Ottawa, unless you want to go and study their rapid bus system, the transit way, which is way better than our rapid bus system, So don't waste your time going to Ottawa unless you get the support of the province. The province is the one that makes the decisions. They have applied for infrastructure funding to the federal government, and everybody knows that. So yeah, you can get some public relation by going there, but the main thing is that Translink should be changed from Crown Corporation to municipality, and that's would make things so much easier. You'll be the same as the regional district of Nanaimo that operate their own transit system, and everything would be more accountable to everybody. A year ago, the CEO was here, and you can look up the video on January 24th, 2019. He promised that rapid bus be 40% faster than regular bus. Well, it's not even 20% faster. And it should be called bogus rapid bus, because it's not the real one. It's not the real one that was invented in Brazil in 1971. So they're spending over $200,000.
So we have got to the end of the time. If you do have a concluding remark, though.
Well, in 1947 we had the best transit system in Canada. Now we are number 3. So, happening. Okay,
Okay,
thanks.
thank you very much for your comments. In terms of your comments regarding engaging both the provincial and federal government, I think we recognize both those levels of governments play a huge role, and we're in constant contact. I think we're very fortunate to have the provincial government has continued to commit to 40% of the capital of Phase 3, yet we have not yet identified that same support federally. So that is why we are pursuing both levels of governments to ensure we get those partnerships. Our next speaker is Alex Boston.
Mr. Chair, Your Worships, Councillors, Alex Boston, Simon Fraser University, Morris J. Wass Centre for Dialogue, and ED of Renewable Cities. I'm here to address the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain proposal, and there's some fundamental weaknesses and inadequacies in the analysis that supports this $3 billion project. There's some outstanding work that has been done, some innovative work that's never before been done to advance the supportive policies agreement, but there's some omissions and some analysis needed to really make this a legitimate business case that can be supported. The first one is every order of government has underscored that this is a climate action project. The emission reductions that have been calculated, for which there's no analysis showing what those emission reductions are coming from, amounts to a rounding error in personal transportation emissions in the region. Literally, it's 0.5% of personal transportation emissions. It's 17,000 tons of GHG reductions. We have 4 million tons of personal transportation GHGs that are steadily rising. This amounts to probably one of the most expensive climate action projects in the history of the region, about $175,000 per ton for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Number two, this project SkyTrain is for high-density mixed-use areas. There are some proposed SkyTrain stations that really look like meadows in a Gulf island. They're not going to develop the ridership that is necessary to make this successful, and there are implications for every municipality around the table in terms of upward pressure on transit fares and downwards pressure on service. If this project does not generate the revenue to pay a substantial and eventually completely pay for the operational and maintenance costs on an annual basis, the entire region is going to suffer in terms of declining transit service and upwards pressure on fares. So there's a need to really have some performance requirements that are well established and actually complement the transit service requirements. That's number two. The last is every business case virtually that Translink has developed includes a calculation of reductions of vehicle kilometers traveled. One of the ways that you can really understand the benefits. There's no inclusion of the calculation, and it's fundamental to understanding whether or not this is an acceptable business case. Right now, this is not a sufficiently robust business case, despite all of the good work that's been done to support a $3 billion eventual investment and a $1.6 billion on the first time around. And I am very optimistic this project can make an important contribution to the region, but as it stands right now, there's no evidence to suggest that it will. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments. Our next speaker is Greg Petipis.
Good morning, Chair, Mayors, and Council. Thank you for giving me a chance to do a presentation again. What we're looking at, what I've chosen to work on today is the difference between TAD and TOD, which is Transportation Adjacent Development and Transportation Oriented Development. We seem to be choosing transit adjacent development, and as I look through the history of SkyTrain, and it goes with the SFU presenter who just gave the presentation, we seem to be doing adjacent transit that doesn't seem to be moving people out of their cars, which is and as a prominent architect out of Santa Clara, California described, then what is the purpose if we're not moving people out? And all of the statistics for the ridership verify that. We are still dwarfed by 1946 BC Electric Company, where their 615 vehicles, all very small, carried 153 million people. So what do we learn from the past? What can we bring forward? And what do we move forward? How do we actually move what we're looking at and get the transit-oriented development that we're looking for? And what I've shown in the presentation is, and I'll start with the transit adjacent, up to 85% of Metro Vancouver is single-family dwellings, which is approximately 10 single-family homes per acre or less. And then you've got a very small part, and I've got to give Vancouver credit for this, they seem to be the best at using the low mid-rise model, and that seems to be the one that is more dedicated towards transit-oriented development. It means that when you walk out of your home, you're getting directly on your transit. Unfortunately, we've gone to the New York model, which means you want to either put everybody underground so that you can have a few cars and you're allowing more people of a certain means to access the roads, which is all transit adjacent. So what do we do in the measure of how we move? And it seems to me that if we use the low mid-rise, especially at stations, that is going to give us our transit-oriented development that will provide the ridership that is going to actually move. People want to be able to get directly on. And so if we can move towards that, I think that would be a much better way than the skyscrapers, which, and I will finish with this, they actually did a study in Chicago in 2017. High-rises are actually less sustainable than single-family homes, and most of the homes were 100 years old versus modern condos. So how do we move forward from that? And hopefully we'll move forward with more answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us today. So that brings us to the end of our open delegation. We're now going to move on to item 3.1 on the agenda, which is the Broadway Subway Supportive Policies Agreement. And I understand there's a staff presentation.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm Sarah Ross. I'm the Director of System Planning. There's a report in your package. I'll just say a couple of things and then take any questions that you might have. When the Mayor's Council approved the extension of the Millennium Line to Arbutus in June of 2018, the Mayor's Council also endorsed the Supportive Policies Agreement for the project, and this agreement was executed by Translink and the City of Vancouver. This report is the first update to the Mayor's Council, and as such, this is a supportive policy agreement in action, I guess you could say, and reporting to the Mayor's Council is a key part of the monitoring program set out in that agreement. So Translink and the City of Vancouver as signatories, as well as the province and Metro Vancouver, are working collaboratively to advance the commitments that are in the agreement, and these are on track for SkyTrain supportive land use and transportation planning. There's a monitoring committee that's established that's comprised of senior staff from those 4 agencies. It's chaired by Translink's Vice President of Planning. And that committee will be tracking both the completion of the specific commitments that are named in the monitoring, in the supportive policies agreement, as well as the overall outcomes as the corridor transforms over time. So specifically, will be monitoring and reporting on things like the change in population, in jobs, in overall development, specifically on affordable housing, as well as outcomes on transit performance and walking and cycling. So the Mayor's Council will receive reports at least annually and in advance of any key junctures, such as decisions on future expansion. The next report will be provided this summer, and that will include the first version of the performance dashboard that will have all the outcome tracking measures, and we will have by the summer the 2019 data of those key measures, and that will form the baseline data that we will be monitoring the outcome of this corridor for from now until I think the end of the agreement is 2040, so for a long period of time, well past opening day. And that, I don't have anything else, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, well, thank you for the update. This is just a report for information for the council, but are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you for the presentation. If I can get a motion for receipt? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving to item 4.1, update on the intermunicipal business license for ride-hailing.
Thank you, Chair. In your package today, on page 14, there's a short report summarizing the progress that we've made since December 12th, when this body directed staff to work with all the municipalities in Zone 1, which includes both Metro Vancouver and outside of that into the Fraser Valley and up to Squamish Lillooet Regional District. And I'm pleased to report that over the last 6 weeks, the group, it is a working group. It has no formal status as far as an actual governmental body, but it is all voluntary. It's been coming together, meeting on a weekly basis, and has progressed on a number of the issues to hit our proposed deadline that was set out by the Mayor's Council of January 31st of this year, which is tomorrow. As I mentioned, the working group is convening weekly. The last scheduled meeting is for tomorrow. There are a few things still to be completed by all of these working groups members representing each one of the municipalities. Then will then make a recommendation that would come forward shortly thereafter, assuming we get agreement, on an actual intermunicipal business license template that each municipality would be urged to adopt, so that we have a standardized approach with one central body for both the administration, collection of licensing, and information out to assist in enforcement provisions. So it has proceeded quite well. The working group has had very robust participation. They have also engaged the industry last week for input, and that has generally been favorable to ensure that what comes out is there's no surprises for anybody. So we, assuming everything goes well, tomorrow we'll be releasing that information from the working group, and then hope that each council will consider that in February and March, so that there's a common framework out there for all of the TNC companies to operate under. It is a voluntary basis, as you recall from December, but we're urging that there is one common license, or else we fear there's a risk about the ability for TNCs to actually operate well, and that the province may have to act. So I think we're in a position where we can avoid that, and we set a really good standard that includes collecting very important data that will help us with planning each one of our municipalities and the region as well. I'll leave it at that, Chair.
Okay, well, really appreciate the update, and appreciate the staff from all of the cities working so hard over the past 6 weeks to try and put this together. It took a lot of collaboration between staff members from all of the city halls and governments across our region there. So really do appreciate that work. That committee has not completed their work yet, and still has one more meeting tomorrow to hopefully go through some resolutions, which is why we're not in a point today to go into the details of the work we do, other than the very high-level, broad details. But hopefully there'll be some more further information coming out soon. So I will now open up to the body. Mayor Walker? No, sorry, Sorry, Mayor Harvey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, I fully support the work and appreciate the work and the leadership of the staff here leading the Intermunicipal Business License Committee through. I do have a motion follow-up. I don't know whether you wanted me to make it now. It's not related to the licensing. It's related to requesting a meeting.
Okay, maybe you could just maybe talk about it there, and we can find out if it falls in.
Sure. I'm sure I'm not alone in this. I found the the whole situation with the Passenger Transportation Board, quite frustrating at times and lengthy delays, et cetera. And also just the lack of transparency and the inability for us as a city, when we request letters, et cetera, not even getting responses back. And it's an important issue, and then just with the licensing issue, when it gets resolved, there's still the situation for Delta and others south of the Fraser on removing the archaic boundaries that exist now that prevent taxis from picking up people from Delta, for example, that want to get home from Vancouver, where they're refused rides and they can't get there. So what I'm requesting is that that this board request representatives and the chair of the Passenger Transportation Board come to a workshop or a meeting, whatever we'd like to call it, with the Mayor's Council so that we can discuss where we're going with the changing of boundaries, which has been requested in the near future.
So I appreciate the sentiment. What I'm going to probably suggest is there is an in-camera portion of this meeting where we're actually talking about some of the intergovernmental issues related to this particular topic, and I think that's probably the best place to deal with that and have that conversation. But I think we will be able to look at that and then obviously report back publicly as well in terms of the outcome of that.
Appreciate that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, are there any other questions or comments at this particular time? Okay, is there a seconder? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, moving to item 4.2, the next steps on the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain project.
Thank you, Chair. So joining me is Jeff Busby, who is the project director for the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain project. Starting on page 16, I believe, in your agenda package, there are several reports consolidated under one set of recommendations in regards to both the business case, advancing that to senior government, as well as with the supportive policies agreement. I will just cover a couple of things about the supportive policies agreement work and then turn it over to Jeff to speak briefly about the status of the business case. Also in your package is a presentation from the City of Surrey planning staff on all of the work that's been undertaken at the city level related to the commitments that are embodied in the supportive policies agreement. As Sarah Ross pointed out in the previous item, this is something that's required, spelled out by the Mayor's Council back in the Mayor's vision and first put in place in 2018. That's part of a broader partnership agreement to try and increase the certainty of the outcomes that are associated with the business case and actually the problem statement and objectives, and outline what each municipality and Translink will do to maximize those benefits, not just increase the certainty as well. So staff's perspective is over the last year that we've been working together. Obviously, it was a very radical shift in both technology and sequencing, and there have been a lot of questions from the Mayor's Council, the board, and the public. To what degree has Surrey and Translink and the province been able to change course and make sure that the planning is appropriate for a SkyTrain technology along that corridor? So the City of Surrey, to their credit, has started a number of planning exercises. Those are outlined in the supportive policy staff agreement, 5 different neighborhood or corridor planning efforts that are underway that intend to complete over the next year or two that will dramatically improve the conduciveness of the urban design to a SkyTrain. They are also committing to meeting or exceeding the targets that are set out by Metro Vancouver in the regional growth strategy. That's something that we have not seen in the previous policy agreements. And as a result of all these activities, we believe that the supportive policies agreements are consistent with the kind of land use, not today, but where we will get, and that's the part of the point of this project, to supportive a SkyTrain technology, and Jeff will speak about some of those outcomes. We're seeing very significant increases in both population and employment, both around the stations, And important on this corridor, it's a connecting corridor. More than half of the ridership that we see being generated, and actually today on the corridor, comes from outside of the corridor. It's connecting from buses and from other means into it. So there are many things at play. The work that the Langleys are doing on their population plans as well, and employment, all impact this plan. So you'll see within the Support Policies Agreement that we are recommending that you endorse that for approval. The final signing of this can happen in coming months and would be presented to you prior to the actual investment plan being approved right now, which is scheduled for June. Jeff will go over some of the outcomes and where we're at with the business case. I think, given in light of some of the comments earlier today, it's important to note since 2008, when this project, or 2009, really became active, it's both a transportation and a land use and a sustainable investment project. It was not primarily a GHG. Obviously, everything that we do is around sustainable modes, but it's really about providing options, organizing the land use south of the Fraser, and coming up with a much more sustainable overall transportation system. Jeff, do you want to start?
Sure. Thank you. So in your package starting on page 21 is a summary of the key policy findings of the business case that we've put together over the last year and 2 months. The business case finds and sets out the rationale for pursuing the project, including how it addresses significant population growth south of the Fraser, how the project addresses transportation challenges, including emerging crowding on existing bus transit service on Fraser Highway. As Jeff Cross has just mentioned, a key element of the project is supporting regional objectives around growth management, connecting major urban centers into the rapid transit network, and at the same time providing access to affordable housing and reducing the transportation burden to make the overall level of affordability improved in the region. The summary identifies the role that the project can serve in addressing our climate change objectives, both through the operation of the project and the reduction in GHGs that are reported in the outcome, but also critically important in supporting the other objectives around providing alternatives to automobiles to increase mode share and reduce vehicle kilometers of travel. As we presented to this board in the summer of last year, the project is recommended to be completed between Surrey Centre and Langley, and with the funding available to be delivered in stages. So the first stage of which is a 7-kilometre extension from King George Station to Fleetwood, 166th Street Station. The report identifies a number of the outcomes that we can expect from that and recommends for your consideration today that we endorse the business case, which would be referred to senior government for their approval. We would come back, pending that approval, with an investment plan that would enable the project to move forward into procurement. Our timeline outlined in the business case for delivery is 2025 for revenue service, again, assuming that an enabling investment plan is approved in the summer of this year. So that's a brief overview of quite a bit of detailed work, and I look forward to any questions that you have.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the update. I think this is another one of the big milestones and hurdles with respect to the SkyTrain project in the city of Surrey. I think if this is passed by the Mayor's Council today, the next step is the business case then goes to the provincial and federal partners for their endorsement. The final step for the approval of this process would actually be a revised investment plan, and as was mentioned in the presentation, that would come in June. So that's the roadmap, but we've certainly come a significant way. I think the previous big milestone happened in July when the Mayor's Council received the business plan. I think nothing substantial has changed between that information and where we are now in terms of the basis for the project and the metrics behind that there. So I will now open up to the Mayor's Council for any questions or discussion on this matter. Oh, Mayor Little.
We're wondering if Mr. Busby can speak to the locations that have been selected for potential stations along the route. Some of them appear to me to be quite close together. Some of them leave only about 8 blocks of distance between one side and the next station, which means that somebody would only have to walk about 5 blocks to go to 2 stations, which is, as a North Shore community that doesn't have rapid transit to it, it's kind of a level of service that I find a little bit surprising. It also, every single time that you have a station, you have to stop the train, and it makes it so that people that are traveling through the system have to stop more frequently. It makes it less likely that they'll be able to get to a downtown destination or wherever it may be in rapid motion. So just wondering if you can speak to the frequency and location of the stations.
Sure, happy to. So for the total project to Langley, there are 8 stations proposed, over 16 kilometers. So that puts the average station spacing on the project a little bit longer than our system average, which is about 1.5 kilometers between stations. For the first stage, we're proposing 4 stations, and as you point out, some of the stations are relatively close together. We work very closely with the City of Surrey, as well as looking at a number of technical and other considerations to identify the specific station locations. Typically, these stations are located on arterial streets because while it's really important that we provide lots of access for people to walk to stations, we've observed and we're predicting for this project that more than half of the eventual users of the project will be arriving from beyond walking distance. That is, that they'll be taking generally feeder bus service to arrive at SkyTrain stations, or they'll be arriving through other modes, being dropped off, or in the case of this project, there's some parking that's provided as well. So the pattern of arterial streets on the corridor is generally what's dictating where the stations are located, and so each of those stations is at a major north-south or east-west bus connection. That pattern of arterial streets also supports the land use planning that's been already in place by the city and is what is being refreshed, and you'll see that reported in the update on the supportive policies agreement. So we believe these stations are in locations where they're likely to get high utilization and that the spacing is appropriate for the demand that we've seen. We've also looked at the predicted ridership on an individual station-by-station basis, and it's performing in the median of our stations across the network. So there isn't any obvious candidate for reduction in the number of stations if that was something that we were to consider for cost or other reasons.
Just a quick follow-up, if I may. Just curious, did Translink suggest a minimum number of stations? Did the station locations come from Surrey? Did the station locations come from our Translink staff? I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
Sure. This corridor has actually been studied for at least a decade, if not more. So there were station locations identified in the planning work done in 2009, 2010. That was the starting point for our analysis. We also compared that to existing bus activity where high ridership was on the corridor. So it's primarily was driven by prior planning work and Translink staff's own analysis. We developed a concept for those station locations and then worked closely with staff and elected officials in the City of Surrey in particular for the first stage to identify the station locations. And I think we have support both at a technical level and from the elected officials for the recommended station locations on the project.
Thank you. Mayor Dingwall?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to speak to the supportive policies agreement, and I would first acknowledge both with Vancouver and also with Surrey that there's a lot of work that's gone into this by staff and by those host cities, and so I think we're onto something really good in terms of driving social planning and development and density and affordability through those agreements. And so again, I applaud those groups that have put the drafts together. But with that, and I hope in the future we're going to see another addition to those supportive policy agreements, and that's around revenue sharing. And I think collectively, and I think everybody around this table knows that our biggest challenge and risk is really around revenue generation for the regional 20% support for any of the projects. And in the past, we've used gas taxes, DCCs, and finding that 20% continues to be a challenge for all of us. And we know it's all critical programs, but finding that 20% is tough. And I know we're into land value capture and looking at community many contribution sharing or looking at the uplift that is occurring in these host jurisdictions. And so for me, I know we're having discussions now, active ones, about that. That's an important, I think, future state. I don't think this agreement is fatal because we can apply it, I think, in the region, regardless of it not being in this agreement. The second thing I would say is this takes us to Fleetwood, and the previous version went further with the light rail. And so again, we're going to have to come up with the regional portion to run from Fleetwood to Langley City, which would be 20% if we secure the funding from the province and the federal government. So again, for me, our biggest risk is revenue generation for the regional share. And hopefully in the next supportive policies agreement and as a general policy, we're going to have changes to that support new ways of finding revenue.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron?
I'm wondering if staff has a response to Mr.
If we could just get you to put your mic on.
I'm wondering if staff have a response to Mr. Boston's request that Translink calculate or share its analysis of the impact, the SLS impact on VKT and shifting modes. And I note on page 8 of the business case summary it's referenced, but we don't have the data, or at least we don't have it publicly. So I'm wondering if there's a reason why. It's obviously been done, so why aren't we showing it?
Yes, I appreciate the opportunity. So certainly that analysis was done, and it underpins the outcomes section of the business case summary. The actual figures didn't make it into the summary, but I have them for you here. So the project, and when I speak of the project, I'm referring to the project to Langley. We can also provide additional information on the first stage, but the project to Langley is projected to reduce vehicle kilometers traveled by 76 million kilometers annually in 2035, and that grows to 87 million annual vehicle kilometers of travel reduction. Those are big numbers, and it's difficult to conceptualize what that means. But we have observed, and you'll see it in the report here, that citizens of Surrey drive 8 million vehicle kilometers per day, and so this is and I think this is typical of all of our investments. No single investment that Translink makes will address all of the transportation challenges, but we are showing that this is a significant project in terms of moving in the right direction. I think the same finding applies to the predicted reductions in greenhouse gases. So we are predicting 17,000 tons in annual reductions in greenhouse gases. As the delegate pointed out, that is a small fraction of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the region and from the transportation sector. But we've been very conservative in how we've characterized that. So those greenhouse gas reductions occur through the reductions in vehicle kilometers of travels of the auto, as well as replacing existing diesel or hybrid diesel buses with electric SkyTrain. But they do not capture the additional greenhouse gas benefits that we anticipate would accrue through intensification of development, for foregoing auto purchases, for all of the other elements that are necessary to move us in the direction of our regional goals around climate action.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So that number, 75,000 or 76,000 or 86, it sounds like a large number, but it's really hard to put that in context. Can you, I mean, you did put it in context of the overall kilometers driven. So can you put it in, give us a context and how that relates to sort of different previous projects we've done, SkyTrain projects in the region? And or can you comment on that sort of benefit, cost benefit intent? You know, we're spending whatever 1.6 billion to get, or 3 billion to get that. And how does that, how are we on that metric?
Right. So the figures are 76 million, just want to be clear, 76 million kilometers annually. I don't have at my fingertips a comparison to a similar project. Perhaps what I would say is that we do prepare a full benefit cost assessment where we quantify all of the benefits of the project, so that typically and what we found in the case for this project, typically the benefits of the project accrue primarily in travel time reduction. So that is time that is saved by users of the transit system or users of other modes who are now attracted to the transit system. That generates the bulk of the benefits. There are additional benefits that come from the reduction in driving, so that is reduced auto cost, reduced pollution, reduced accidents, etc. When we add up all of those benefits over the full life of the project and compare it to the costs, we're finding that the benefits exceed the costs, and that's why we have reported a benefit cost ratio of 1.124. So those are included in that analysis, and certainly can make available more detailed appendices that describe our calculation methodology if that's of interest to this body or members of the public. Our typical process is that we produce that as a summary. We have to go through some reviews by senior government. That's the next step for this project, and so we typically finalize that evaluation once we've gone through that senior government review, because there occasionally are changes that occur in response to that review. So that's why you're seeing a summary today, and we'll make the more detailed reports available in the future.
One benchmark that is included is the benefit cost ratios compared to the Evergreen extension. It's very similar to that. The ridership projections, even for stage 1, are projected to be higher than what we're seeing right now on the Evergreen extension. So it's similar. That's a proxy for some of the other things that are happening.
Okay. Are there any other, Mayor Belinkie?
A couple of questions / a little bit disjointed in a couple of the comments as well. Being a newer mayor, not having been involved in the previous conversations, I understand, as I was catching up early on, that we aren't considering, for example, a new bridge to the North Shore, despite the fact it might have the most positive impact for the region for actual travel. And we're not considering that because we could never afford it. We can't afford this either. The numbers that you're presenting are for a completed project. And they're not in comparison to another project that we couldn't afford either, like a half a bridge fully completed to the North Shore. The comparison of the numbers to projects that we've already done are great, but that's in the past, and there's no accounting for what the future could hold. I would prefer, in consistent with Councillor Cameron's comments, to see the comparison on Earth projections in comparison to, for example, an incomplete or a half-completed bridge once completed to the North Shore, where I think there's a higher regional need. And if we're going to consider projects that we can't afford, we might as well take a look at what the metrics would be to support another project we couldn't afford with the same amount of money. I think the project from Surrey to Langley is essential. It's got to happen. But the numbers you're giving are skewing because it's a completed project you're showing the benefits for, and there's no money to complete it. And I think we have to keep that in mind. And if we're looking at projects we can't afford, let's take a look at the potential impact of a bridge to the North Shore.
So I wonder if that can comment on the business case for just the SkyTrain to Fleetwood as well, too.
Just to emphasize Jeff's points, we've done a business case for all the way to Langley City, recognizing, though, that the request of senior governments at this point is stage 1 to Fleetwood. So that is the $1.63 billion project, for which, while we still have to go through senior government approval processes because it's a new project, the money is there, as is the regional money at this point that was identified in the Phase 2 plan. So from an affordability perspective, that piece is sort of nailed down. We take your point about this, from Fleetwood to Langley has been identified by the Mayor's Council previously as the next priority for that. But at this point, that is not the request that we're looking for the Mayor's Council and the board in June, assuming a successful round with senior government. It would just be for the stage 1.
No, but I think what's being asked is the business case, is the numbers above 1 for just the project to Fleetwood?
Yes. So this body received an update in July of 2019 looking at a variety of staging scenarios. So we looked at SkyTrain from King George to Fleetwood, from King George to Clayton, from King George to Langley City. The findings that you see here summarized for you are for King George to Langley, but they are consistent with what we found in July. That is that the benefits of King George to Fleetwood alone exceed 1. The ridership is strong. strong. In fact, it exceeds what we see on the Evergreen extension today. So we sought to answer the question, should we build SkyTrain at all? And should we build SkyTrain to Langley City? That's what's summarized for you in this report. But we also have found and are recommending that we build SkyTrain to Fleetwood because it has merits even in that initial segment.
Well, thanks. Thank you, and recognize and appreciate the clarification. And follow up, what's missing in this as a business case? Because that's what we're talking about today. What's missing in this is the plan for the subsequent funding, and should the subsequent funding not be achieved, should we even be questioning what we're proposing to advance today? There isn't a timeline for the securing of the subsequent funding. It's not in this plan. It's not the actual capital costs in the future based on timelines which also aren't communicated for securing that funding aren't 100% clear. And if we're looking years down the road, we know how much these projects advance in cost, we know the price will rise, and that's not included. So we're asked to approve a business case with the metrics that support a completed business case as opposed to just what you're proposing now, with no guarantee of being able to secure the funds later. And that should be concerning.
So I'll just reiterate the request to senior governments as it relates to funding is for the stage 1 progress. They want to see how it stands either as a full project or all the way to Fleetwood. And as Jeff just pointed out, either project stand alone. If you could do the full thing, it has a very positive business case. All the way to Fleetwood also has a very positive business case. The request at this point to senior government and what we're looking at from our construction timeline and the dollar flows and the fact that the money has been identified at a regional level, previously at provincial and federal, is just for the $1.63 billion project. The timelines that we're assuming for the rest of the project, per the direction of the Mayor's Council, is to work with senior government to identify those funds and to come back in early 2021 with a phase 3 plan for the remainder.
Sorry, the horse twitched, so I'm just going to beat it a little harder. I don't think as a standalone project you'd find $1.6 billion, which could fund 5 more projects for the region. To Fleet would be the primary choice for most of the people at this table. And so if we take a look at this as a standalone to Fleetwood for that $1.6 billion, we'd be considering other projects. The project needs to be completed all the way to Langley. The funding's just not there yet, and that would be the standalone I hope that we would consider today, because no one, I think, in their right mind would think, well, except for the gentleman who lives at 166, so he's got easy transport from his house, would think that's the primary use of funds for this.
Okay, well, just a comment on that. I think what's being presented here is consistent with the decisions that have been made at the Mayor's Council to move forward with the funding that we do have available. I think the Mayor's Council was very keen to recognize extending the SkyTrain to Fleetwood. What is the business case for that, and is that a viable project moving forward in a phased approach? And I think the information being put forward is that it does have a good business case comparable to other SkyTrain projects. Although the hope and ambition is to obviously continue that through the phase 3 funding, I think the numbers have demonstrated that even the extension just along Fleetwood still does have a solid business case to move along. So I'm going to move on the speakers list. Director McCutcheon.
Excuse me. Sort of building on Councillor Cameron's question, I was wondering about the numbers for reducing vehicle kilometers traveled just to Fleetwood. Do you have those numbers?
We'll have to provide those separately. I don't have them in front of me.
Okay.
Mayor Richard Stewart.
Thank you. You made a comment, and you'll always get this from me, that the numbers, the ridership from Fleetwood alone, just the standalone project to Fleetwood, outshine the Evergreen Line's performance to date. How many cars are on a train to Fleetwood under those numbers? Because I can't imagine you're going to run 2-car trains out from Fleetwood and then make them 4- or 6-car trains after that. And you've pretty much shackled the Evergreen Line by leaving it as 2-car trains, so it's standing room only when you get to Port Moody. So let's just not be loose with comparisons.
Yeah, and I apologize if there's any slight implied by the comparison to Evergreen. So our projection is in the year 2035, the line to Fleetwood would be carrying similar numbers of people as who are currently today in 2020 riding the Evergreen extension. So we're not saying one project is better than the other. We're just giving some context to the ridership number. In terms of the operating plan for the extension, this is an extension of the Expo line, which is our busiest line, and so we have the highest capacity vehicles that are running on that line today. And so we would envision that not all trains, but a fraction of the trains would extend past Surrey City Centre onto the extension. So as you'll see in the summary, service would be every 6 to 8 minutes on opening day. That compares to service every 3 minutes that's being run on the Millennium Line to Coquitlam and through into Burnaby and Vancouver today. If we were to lengthen the trains on that service with the fixed number of trains available, we would have to widen the headway to be about twice as frequent, or twice as infrequent as they are now. So we've made the trade-off to run short trains more often, which we find is a more effective use of our automated train solution. As you know, we are undergoing a pretty significant fleet expansion, which will allow for more capacity on the Expo and Millennium lines in the coming years.
Just another clarification, the 3 minutes is rush hour on Evergreen. It's like most of the day it's 6 minutes to 12 minutes. But
correct. Yeah, and the equivalent numbers for the proposed extension are 6 to 8 minutes in rush hour and approximately 10 to 15 minutes in the off-peaks, because we'll be running the longer vehicles.
Thank you. Mayor Buchanan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation and the information to date. I'm just curious, did the business case consider what the benefit cost ratio would be just for aligning the project in phases? So Mayor Belinkie talked about the entire project and what we have in our packages for the entire project, but did it actually do that analysis to breaking it up into the phases?
Yes, that was the analysis that we undertook and was presented in July. And so we found that the business case for the first phase, or we're calling it the first stage to Fleetwood, had a benefit cost ratio in excess of 1.12 was what we found there. That benefit cost ratio increases as the project is extended further east because we are covering more of the region and we're serving an important job and cluster that is near Langley Centre.
So the first phase, so what I'm seeing here on page 12, is the benefit cost analysis at 1.24.
Yes.
That's for the whole project?
Correct.
And to Fleetwood, it's 1.2?
No, it was 1.12 as we reported back in
1.12.
July of
Okay.
last year.
Sorry. Okay. And then I'm just curious as well in terms of the project, does our climate action projections, does it align with Metro Vancouver's policies, climate action policies?
Mayor Buchanan, that's a larger sort of system-wide. So Metro Vancouver's are carbon neutral by 2050 and 45%, I believe, by 2030. Translink's still going through the analysis to look at that. Our targets have been 100% renewable, but 80% by 2050. So this is, as Jeff pointed out, the rapid transit projects or any project are an important piece, but there's got to be broader analysis done on what's happening to the other 75% of the mode share on what's happening there. But moving people into rapid transit, especially when it is electrified, like this is one piece of our low carbon fleet strategy.
Okay, thank you. I just have a couple others. That's okay. So I'm just curious too, we are, from our perspective, very supportive of developing a policy to guide the decision making. And we talked about that at the planning meeting. Particularly around municipal contributions to major projects. But I'm just curious about making sure, or just making a comment in terms of really feel that the policy needs to carefully define what we are considering as major projects, so that there's no misinterpretation when these projects move forward. So I think the language that we're using in these need to be really clearly defined, so all parties understand what they are. And then the other is just in terms of what's being presented and the plans that Surrey is moving forward with, a number of neighborhood plans, and they're saying that they're going to be exceeding targets for the population and employment growth. And I'm just wondering that does the changes in those growth targets trigger any changes to the regional planning level? So for Metro 2040, are there any amendments that need to happen given that they want to exceed?
So I believe, Mayor Buchanan, we're looking outside, to 2050, so we're now into a new horizon, and the work with Metro Vancouver is probably more on a redistribution of the growth within the city of Surrey as opposed to increasing the overall total in the city of Surrey. So still being kind of consistent with, I believe, whatever we call it, the municipal control totals or the general sort of targets that are included.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mayor Brody.
Going back to the point, Mr. Chair, about the stations that were brought up by Mayor Little and Mayor Buchanan, on the stations, are they all, does the population in each of the areas justify those stations that are planned? And I'm thinking back on the Canada line to the Capstan station, which is now just years later being developed as a result of developer money. The Olympic Village in Vancouver that was funded by Vancouver because at that time development did not justify it. The Gateway station on the Expo line in Surrey was funded, as I understand, by development. Is there development and density in every single area which justifies all those stations?
So as I was mentioning around our considerations for the station locations, we started with observing where is the highest transit usage today, and that's our starting point. Looking at the existing bus routes today, where is the highest demand, and then looking at previous planning studies for the corridor. Each of the stations, and I'm speaking now particularly for the 4 stations that we're proposing at stage 1, each of those stations is located at the intersection of a major north-south or east-west arterial street, which has existing frequent bus service on it. So if we were to entertain changes in either the number of those stations, we would be missing the opportunity to provide a connection to bus service, which will extend from beyond the station walking area. And so the comparisons to some of those other stations are apt because some of those other stations are intended to support development immediately within the walking area. And so it's difficult for me to answer whether the station is justified just by that development within the immediate walking area because the rationale for these stations that we're proposing extends beyond. There will be people, for example, on 152nd Street in Surrey. That's a bus corridor that travels 10 or more kilometers south all the way to the U.S. border. We are predicting that people will travel from South Surrey up to connect into the SkyTrain there, and that's generating quite a bit of the ridership at that station. So that is how we've approached the station location work. The supportive policies and related planning initiatives that you see prepared by the City of Surrey, those are really intended to build out the ridership mostly within the walking distance of the station. And what we're seeing, and you see some maps in the annex to the report, are that the densities, both in terms of population and employment, are similar to those that we see in other SkyTrain stations right across Metro Vancouver.
Well, using the 152nd Street station, isn't it a fact that in 2050 there's not going to be significant density around that station?
With Mayor Brody, within your package on map 2 of the page 70 does give some examination comparison of density along that corridor to other areas, and this is still at a fairly large aggregate level, but it is comparable even at 1/52nd to what we're seeing at some other stations across the system.
Well, okay. All right. And I'm just wondering if most people are taking transit to get to 152nd, using that as an example, why can't they just take transit to go to 160th or to 140, whatever that, 148 is it? 140. I mean, and if Surrey chooses, I mean, this is $50 million we're probably talking about here, $50 or $60 million. So why wouldn't it be a condition that if Surrey wants that, Surrey would have that option as Vancouver exercised their option for the Olympic Village?
Mayor Brody, I would say that those north-south corridors are serving not just getting people to that actual rapid transit line, which today is the frequent bus 502. They're serving lots of other purposes. I would imagine Surrey would say the density of our bus network already needs to probably be improved to catch more of the population that's happening around the region, let alone pushing it onto fewer corridors. So they're serving multiple purposes. I think staff's response to your first question, are the stations that are identified here in stage one justified on opening day to support the business case? The answer from us would be yes. And some of that is driven by the ridership that's coming from those bus networks that we think we haven't identified exactly what our full bus integration plan would be, but based on the demand that's been building over decades, that the system is fairly solid right now, and we'd not want to be shifting that. So we think it's justified based on the connections that are being made and its place in the network, as well as then the additional growth that will happen around those stations with the Fleetwood plan, et cetera, will just even build on top of that and get more ridership.
I'll only comment on it that it would be interesting to look back on some of these decisions that I've talked about and see whether that analysis would be the same today as it was then.
Okay, so there are a series of recommendations on page 16 of the report. I will look to the body if they would like to move that recommendation. Or those? It's been moved. It's been seconded. Seeing no further discussion, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It carries. And that brings us to the end of our open meeting today. So if I can get a motion to adjourn. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
We're just going to take a 15-minute recess so we can reset the room. So if you'd like to take that time to get refreshments, and we'll get the doors closed both here, and we'll get back in 15.